Shalom, brother and sister truth seekers. So, it has been an interesting few weeks here, but I guess the time has finally come. That is my current understanding for the timing of the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, or Shavuot, and in keeping with Leviticus 23:21, ye shall proclaim on the selfsame day. This holy day is, I guess, kind of unique in this manner, because none of the other holy days do I see this instruction to proclaim in the selfsame day. So again, this is my current understanding. It has been an interesting few weeks. There have been some really good discussions. If you check out the comment sections below the videos in this series, especially the ones in part 2, and especially the ones I think most important for those who are looking to see what the Dead Sea Scrolls have to say, I would point them towards the comments in the part 2 video and the discussion that was had with the Micah YouTube profile. That was a good discussion, some good points brought up by Micah, and I responded to those, and I believe we had a good discussion, and we've just kind of run out of time. So that's not to say that this is completely forever and all time set in stone, but after having all this discussion, I guess now we're finally to the day, and a decision has to be made, and I still have peace with today being the day, but I remain open-minded, so if you're watching this, please feel free to continue those discussions. And I'm always open to more iron sharpening iron. So, but anyway, today is my current understanding that is the day, and so I guess it's the 5th Gregorian month, the 24th day of the 5th Gregorian month, and that is day 50, Pentecost. And so, in a nutshell, again, the summary of all that is, the main reason, okay, my computer program's frozen, but the main reason I come to this understanding is because in Leviticus 23:14, if my computer will wake up here, okay, here we go, 14. It says, ye shall eat neither bread, nor parched corn, nor green ears, until the selfsame day you brought an offering unto your Elohim, or Yahweh, So, but the greater context, I think, is potentially very important, and you have to start back in 23:10, and this is specifically for when ye come into the land, and so these instructions follow this specific directive for when ye come into the land. Now there's another set of instructions that are briefly talking about the Feast of Weeks, and they don't mention some of the other instructions. So that was an interesting point in discussion that was brought up in some of the comments below the other videos, part 2 of Micah's discussion. And I think it's important to keep in mind the context. And for example, if you go to Deuteronomy 16:9, feel free to jump in here if I missed something and let me know, but I believe if you read the context of this, it doesn't seem to be saying anything about when you enter the land. This is in general, or as the brother put it, for all generations, so to speak. But the interesting thing here is all it says about calculating first fruits or Feast of Weeks is it only says count 7 weeks, and begin to number from the time you put the sickle to the corn. So that's an interesting point. But the point is, it doesn't say anything about what they ate, but it does talk about what they ate here in Leviticus 20-14, and I believe that is because it is specifically for the context of when they first came into the land. And so, essentially, in a nutshell, what this is saying, when you first come into the land, you're not supposed to eat any grains or anything made from grains, whether they be new, whether they be old. Any grains from the new land, you were not supposed to eat it until an offering was made. And to me, that just currently makes sense. Like, entering the promised land, I think they entered they crossed the River Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. So it was 3 or 4 days before Passover, like the week before Passover. And, it just makes sense that they were eating manna in the wilderness, and so they were commanded to eat unleavened bread with the Passover, and we read in Joshua 5:11 or 10, that they did eat the Passover, and in other verses we read about the second Passover that was kept in the wilderness, and I believe for both of those Passovers, the unleavened bread they were eating had to be made out of manna, because they weren't allowed to touch any of the new grains from the land, any of the grains, new, old, cooked, anything, I don't think, per Leviticus 23's 14's instruction, when they first came into the land. But they did, so for that Passover, I think they were eating unleavened bread made out of manna, so there's no violation of that instruction in Leviticus 23:14. And that was kind of an important point, because there was a discussion between new or old, but I'm still open-minded, but it does seem like this verse is talking about more than just the new corn. But anyway, or grain. So they, on the selfsame day, they did eat parched corn and old grain of the land. The point being, they ate grains from the land on the morrow after the Passover, and so that's significant. And I don't think there's any contradiction of any of the other instructions. But it's significant because if you think about it, they were eating manna for 40 years, and then they finally came into the promised land, and this was the first gift or blessing or fruit of the promised land that they had the opportunity to eat the old grains. I guess maybe they did excuse me. Oh, excuse me. I do not have the coronavirus. It's just early in the morning, and I gotta clear my head a little bit. Anyway, baby's awake too, so I might have to cut this short. But anyway, it is important. Where was I? The old and green. It's not important, I don't think, the difference between old and new. It's just the fact that it was from the land, and they waited. It was a blessing from the land after 40 years of eating manna. And before they could eat anything from the land, they had to offer a thank offering, a wave offering. So I'm guessing there must have been like new grain for them to wave for the sheath, but it wasn't. I've heard you cannot make bread out of green grains. It's not possible to make it out of green grains. But that might be beside the point. But I just wanted to, if anyone has any food for thought on that, let me know. But I think the instruction for the wave offering was actually to wave green grains, like a sheaf of it, And but just because they ate old corn of the land doesn't necessarily change anything. It's still grain from the land one way or another. Eating the old grain, waving the new grain. It's still all the same. It's still all included in Leviticus 23:14, I believe. And so, there's no contradictions, no disharmony that I can see at the moment. I am open, so please let me know if you think otherwise. But so the sequence of all this again was the context of Leviticus 23:10 through 14 is when they came into the land. Let's see. When you come into the land. So this is specific for when they came into the land. And they were not to eat bread, parched corn, or green ears until the same day. The selfsame day you brought an offering unto your Elohim. So then they came into the promised land. Did I just mess it up? And they ate the Passover that was made out of manna, I believe. And then they must have, they had been in the promised land for, like I said, from the 10th day of the first month was when they crossed over. So that's roughly a week before Passover. It gave them a week to potentially, find the old corn and potentially the sheaths of the green grain and potentially make that first fruits offering. Another important, so potentially, like, that's another good point. They could have made the first fruits wave offering, any time after the 10th day of that first month, any time when they found that grain. I don't know necessarily if there is any specific instruction that says it must be after the week of unleavened bread or during the week of unleavened bread. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not sure why it couldn't possibly be before unleavened bread. I understand people do tie like prophetic events and Yeshua rising or whatnot, and I'll just mention a brief thought I had as food for thought on that. Like, well, I still have to look into it for sure, but I wondered, the accounts in the New Testament of when he rose, I thought a lot of them said first day of the week. I'm going to have to look into that, or after the Sabbath had passed. And if it was the first day of the week, or after the Sabbath had passed, that seems to coincide with the starting of the counting of the Omar. Because you were supposed to start that count on the day. You weren't supposed to. There's a little subtle thing that I kind of noticed, and maybe I just never. I think my calendar actually has it wrong. Like, this is okay. My computer's frozen, so my spreadsheet might not open. Okay, here we go. So this is not necessarily true. I just want to mention this, and I put a little note here. First fruits could fall before the first day of the 50-day count. So, and that is because, I should have put a scripture reference there, but I believe that is because of this verse right here. And ye shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day you brought the sheaf. So if you brought the sheaf sometime the week before, it was the morrow after the Sabbath from the day you brought the sheaf. So you could have brought the sheaf and say, I don't know, any day of the week, but then you go forward to that following Sabbath, and it's the morrow after that Sabbath. But anyway, back to Yeshua. I need to look into this more, but if he did rise on the first day, like, regardless of this note, like, the count still does begin here, and if he rose, I'm going to have to look into that more, but it's interesting to see the possibility that he might have, like, rose for the first day of the count, and then he stuck around almost until the end of the count, and then the Holy Spirit came at the beginning of the count, or end of the count, on Pentecost. And I don't know if there's anything to, like, the wave sheaf like the wave sheaf, if it was green or alive or new and it's cut down and waved, I wonder if that has anything to do with Yeshua being killed and kind of put on the cross and waved, maybe. But it's interesting, potentially, that the count, there seems to be something to the first day of the week in the New Testament accounts, and I wonder if there's any correlation there, so I'm going to have to look into that. But anyway, like I said, the instruction in Leviticus 23:14 seems, with regards to this holy day, seem to be specifically for when you come into the land. And it says, when you first come into the land, don't eat all these things. Don't eat any grains from the new land, or cooked grains into bread. Don't eat anything until any grains or anything made from grains until you offer an offering. And so we see them eating grains from the land in Joshua 5:11. And so to me that's saying that first fruits must have happened prior to this day, and likely, very likely prior to this day, because as I mentioned in Leviticus 23:14, 15, it's the morrow after the Sabbath you begin your count, but it's also from the day you brought the wave sheaf offering. So if the wave sheaf offering was brought sometime in the week, like after the 10th day of the first month when they came in, they could have brought the wave offering almost immediately, but then they still had to wait until the Sabbath from the day they brought the wave sheaf, and then the morrow after that Sabbath they would begin the count. So there was just, again, like 4 days for them to accomplish this, and I guess that's just a possibility. And remind me to talk more about Deuteronomy 16:9 in a moment, but no contradiction with the commandment or instruction to eat unleavened bread with the Passover mentioned previously, or I guess in both of these verses. I think that was made from manna. And then the question is what to do going forward, and like what did they do the next year, and what are we to do? Like, how is there any relevance? How can we make a connection to this? Like, how can we obey this nowadays? And again, the point I think that is very important is the context. And this is specifically talking about when they first entered the land. So these additional instructions about what to eat were for, I believe, when they first entered the land. You do see a repeat instruction talking about the timing of the Feast of Weeks for, I guess, going forward, I think. And it doesn't seem to mention anything about what you can or cannot eat. It just says, 7 weeks shalt thou number unto thee. Begin to number 7 weeks from such time thou puttest the sickle to the corn. And, this, I guess, corn would just be grain, I'm thinking. Let's see here. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll show you what that word is, according to the Strong's at least. Corn, so that's the kama. Can't pronounce that. But I think it is grain, in general, green grains. So that was how they did it going forward, I think, and kind of what our cue is nowadays, and I'm going to have to look into that more. But this is potentially a bigger verse than I think most realize, because the context of this verse is for future generations, I think, as opposed to just when they entered the land, which was specified in Leviticus 23, 10 through 14. So I think everything is in harmony. Again, there was good discussion in part 2, the comment section under part 2, and I kind of talked broadly about all that. If you want more detail, there might have been a few more points, but I think that's it. That's essentially it in a nutshell, and that's my current understanding. If feel free to continue this discussion. I am a truth seeker. If more good points could be brought to the table, or if people think I'm missing something, I'm definitely open to see it. And there might be time to even change my mind and make a decision for another time if the conviction does come and truth and witnesses do seem to add up that it was a different date other than today. But for now, that might be as far as I got this year. It's interesting. You go to my YouTube channel, and there's a YouTube playlist on my channel if you go to the playlist tabs called The Creator's Times, and that's kind of where I put all the videos related to set times discussions. Not really the luminary observations that I do so much to try and confirm the times for Genesis 1:14, but more specifically a discussion about the quote-unquote calendar, like what's in Leviticus 23 and the timing of all that. So it's been a progression from year to year, the topic of first fruits and the Feast of Weeks, but I think I do feel peace about this so far this year, but definitely open to study, so please feel free to continue the iron sharpening iron. But I think this is where I'm going to leave off this year. Deuteronomy 16:9. This, I believe, is the context for us nowadays, and I'm going to just talk just a little bit more about what I think is kind of fascinating and interesting about that is this is the only verse that seems to give a very clear timestamp. Like if you notice the other holy days, it's always very clear. The Creator is always very clear. He says, the 14th day of the first month, the 15th day of the first month. The trumpets is on the first day of the 7th month. Like it's always very clear. But we don't really see that for the Feast of Weeks or First Fruits. But this we don't see it in Leviticus 23 anyway, that I can tell. But in Deuteronomy 16:9, it does kind of have that sort of a timestamp, and it tells you when to start counting. The interesting thing is it's not really tied to a day of the month like the other holy days, but it almost seems to be tied to the time you put the sickle to the corn. Now there's a lot of gray italics in here, so I'm definitely going to be continuing to dig into the original language this year and next year, and if anyone has any thoughts on that, please let me know. But I don't know how this is supposed to work with different climates and different growing seasons and things. This verse seems very similar to the types of verses where people started looking for the abib, a barley or grain or something, for trying to determine the start of the year, which I don't agree with that, and I wonder if maybe it's a verse like this that kind of brought some of those chains of thoughts around. Like if it was okay to do this for the Feast of Weeks, then why shouldn't it be okay to do that for the first day of the year? I'm not sure. I mean, maybe I just haven't found the specific verse that that explains the exact date. And this is kind of just another account that explains it in a different way, sort of like how there are verses that say begin to number in the month of Abib when talking about the first day of the year. But the problem is there are other verses, Genesis 1:14 that says the times are dictated by the movements of the heavenly luminaries. So, this is interesting. I don't know. I'm going to have to keep looking into it, try and understand if the original language is anything going on in the original language here, but this does seem to be clearly saying when to begin this count. So, I mean, just as food for thought, I mean, I don't know, like where I live in West Virginia, it was around like Passover and unleavened bread that some of the first things you could eat from the land were starting to pop up. So I guess it's possible, but that the time you were putting sickle to the corn, you could start numbering, but that just seems a little like it could almost be all over the place. I don't know if it's actually more consistent than I think, but anyway, or maybe we again, you have to look to see what was the climate and timing in Israel, maybe in the Promised Land for this. I don't know. There's more to look into, but so far the summary of all of it is, I think everything seems to be in harmony, showing that the Joshua 5:11 account, there's no violation of instructions here. I don't think they ate the Passover unleavened bread made from manna. I don't see any issues with that. And then they ate of the grains of the land, which was mentioned in Leviticus 20-14 on the day following the Passover. So it seems first fruits would have had to have been sometime before then. And again, they did come into the land on the 10th day of the first month, so they had roughly a little less than a week to do that. And I guess I don't see why they couldn't have done that. And then it just happened to be that Passover that year was on a normal 7th-day Sabbath year, and so the count began on the morrow after the Passover. So I guess that's a possibility. And as far as the years going forward, again, the context of Leviticus 14 and what to eat or not to eat is only for, it seems to be for when you came into the land. From there, I think the instruction we need to pay attention to is the account in Deuteronomy 16:9, which doesn't say, I don't believe the context of this verse was for when they first entered the land. It's kind of in general. And it doesn't mention anything about what you can eat or can't eat. It's just an event that you're looking for, I guess. But that is my current understanding. It has been an interesting few weeks, and like I said, it's just, I hate to say that study is only really intensifying around these holy times, but it really has, but I'm going to continue to look into these things, and I appreciate all the comments and discussion that have been brought up so far, and I look forward to more. And as truth seekers, we do need to be open to letting our light shine, the conviction on your heart, speak the truth in love, and let's have loving iron sharpening iron. This needs to happen. Nothing gets a free pass. We need to be diligent to test all things, and, we need to learn to love one another as we bring points to the table to be discussed, and just speaking the truth in love, again, or our current understanding of what we think truth is in love, but in love. One of I think the chief things about love is patient, love is kind. I want to say love is humble. I think humble is one of those attributes of love. But humbly, with fear and trembling and humility, realizing that we might be wrong. I might be wrong in what I'm saying, and so I say this with the disclaimer that this is just my current understanding, and I am open-minded. This is a journey, and you've just got to test and prove every step of the way. So that's where I'm currently at today, being the end of the Omar count. So the 50th day. So again, the 24th day of the 5th Gregorian month in the year 2020. That's where I'm landing. And so again, in accordance with, where is that? I say it today. I may say it again if, I guess, if more points can be brought to the table and I get another conviction. But I proclaim this to you as the verse says to do here. This is my current understanding, so consider it and let me know your thoughts. Shalom, and may Abba bless as you continually seek out His truth in love with a pure heart.